Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Ben Lucas. I am a government relations specialist for the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank all of you for joining us today for this broadband webinar. This is part 3 in the series called Bring Me Up to Speed, hosted by the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. Before we start, I wanted to just take a moment and introduce and thank all of our sponsors for today's webinar. Without their support, this event would not be possible, and the Maine Chamber greatly appreciates their support of today's program. Our high-speed series sponsor is Mission Broadband. Our bandwidth sponsors are AARP Maine and LCI Fiber Optic Network. Our community sponsors are First Light, Hammond Lumber Company, Northern Light Health, Freddie Flaherty, and the University of Southern Maine School of Business. And finally, we have our webinar series sponsors, who are Central Maine Power, Eaton Peabody, MEMIC, and Rudman Winchell. Unfortunately, Chamber President and CEO Dana Connors was not able to join us today due to a scheduling conflict, but I wanted to share some thoughts from the Chamber before starting this webinar. As I mentioned earlier, this is a series that we have been doing. In the first 2 webinars, we focused on what was happening policy-wise down in Washington, D.C., and what Congress potentially could do and what they could pass for potential investments into Maine. Now we have more than $200 million that have been invested into Maine for broadband, and we're going to be focusing this webinar on a Maine perspective in highlighting the newly established Maine Connectivity Authority. This is a brand new authority, which has only met once, I believe. Some of our panelists can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But the authority will help with the oversight of these investments and help expand broadband to as many Mainers as possible, which is why today's program is such a critical one and why we are so lucky to have a great group of panelists assembled today. Before we get to that, I did want to turn it over to a brief video message from Jim Rogers of Mission Broadband, who is one of our broadband series sponsors.
Hello, I am Jim Rogers, President of Mission Broadband. I am very pleased to have Mission Broadband join the Maine State Chamber of Commerce in this series of information forums on the critical topic of broadband for our state. Mission Broadband is a company within the ProInfonet family of companies that I began in 1995 as independent technology consultants. For the past 25 years, ProInfonet has provided superior consulting services to its clients across the United States. Today, we are the managing agent for the New England Telehealth Consortium, providing support to nearly every healthcare provider in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. NETSI was established to help members maximize available federal funding and is going into its 15th year. Over those 15 years, we have secured over $100 million federal funding for the NETSI members. In 2013, I expanded the assistance to healthcare providers by creating Health Connect Networks. Health Connect Networks assists healthcare providers in 22 states to maximize available federal funding to bring much-needed connectivity and dependability to over 2,500 locations across the country. 2 years ago, I started Mission Broadband to focus on the needs of towns that lack adequate broadband. Our goal is to assist municipalities, providers, and other government subdivisions expand critically needed broadband for their areas. We do this through coordination of public-private partnerships, locating funding opportunities, and in some cases, assisting the entity in building a network. Every community is a bit different with their needs or their economic outlook, but one thing is clear: we all need to work together to improve broadband. Our Bangor-based team has provided superior consulting services to its clients across the United States, with many years of industry experience performing broadband network consulting, feasibility studies, design, build, implementation, and project management. Our multifaceted experience covers municipalities, healthcare, private business, ISPs, and broadband networks. You can learn more about us at missionbroadband.com. Thank you again to the Maine State Chamber of Commerce and to all of you for joining this important series. We look forward to today's informative session.
Great, thank you, Jim. I would now like to turn it over to Jay from AARP, who is another one of the series sponsors, to offer a few remarks before we begin the program. Jay?
Thanks, Ben, and thanks to the Maine State Chamber for pulling together this very important and valuable series on an issue that I think everybody has come to face and come to terms with over the last 2 years. AARP Maine is at the table when it comes to broadband. Often we get some raised eyebrows when we do, but it's an important issue for the 200,000 members that we have here in the great state of Maine. Issues like telehealth, access to communities, and access to families hit home with many of the older Mainers from Presque Isle down to Saco. And we also know that issues like isolation can often be dealt with and addressed through technology, but many of our members lack the ability to actually plug in at all. And so if we're talking about the digital divide, the 65 plus, the 50 plus community is often the one on the wrong side of that divide. And so increasing the access to affordable broadband is incredibly important for Maine's oldest population, not just from an economic standpoint, not just from a healthcare standpoint, but also from an isolation and lifestyle standpoint. We know that many older Mainers are starting to use things like online banking at a much higher clip than other populations and demographics. And so if they can't do that from their home, if they can't do it from the new smartphone they've just purchased, it's going to only become more difficult for them to engage and become a part of the communities that they helped build. We've also seen and have heard reports that many city council and local select board meetings have increased participation as soon as they went virtual, knowing that many folks like to join and see what's happening at the local level from their living room couch or from their kitchen table. And the ability to do that virtually relies on broadband. And so we are very happy to be at the table and be a part of this conversation. We're a proud member of the Maine Broadband Coalition. And I would urge folks to check out the upcoming, I believe it's the third Maine Broadband Summit next week, Thursday and Friday, where we'll be putting a lot of these issues around broadband front and center. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jay. Very important message to share. Now, I did want to, before we turn into today's program, I did want to cover a few housekeeping items just for all the folks in attendance. This meeting is being recorded. We will notify you when the video is available for on-demand viewing. To reduce background noise, all audience members will participate in a listen-only mode. If you have any questions, you can please click your raise hand button or type your question into the chat. And we plan to leave the final 20 minutes or so, and we'd love to have an open dialogue for questions and answers for our panelists. So please enter your comments into the chat as they come up, and we will certainly be monitoring it. A copy of meeting materials will be viewable on our website when the video is recorded, when the video recording is posted, sorry. And if you lose your Zoom connection, you can close out, try to reconnect, and hopefully you can get back in. So that covers some of the housekeeping items that I have. I would now at this point like to turn it over to Mike Reed from Mission Broadband, who Mike will be moderating today's program, and he will also introduce our panel. So Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Ben. Good morning, everyone. It really is a pleasure to be here and join this panel. Just a bit more of a commercial on the chamber side. We've been sharing in this hot topic. This is the most attention to broadband that I have seen in, I won't even tell you how many years I've been doing this work. It is really exciting. We've never been in this position before to actually be able to solve the problem or make one heck of a dent in it. So the support we have from the Maine legislature and the governor to get this authority established and put Maine in a position of being able to coordinate everything that's going on. It's difficult. You read the press, you see the funding that's coming our way, And to have Maine proactively be in this position is, I have to tell you, I watch this across the country, and Maine is taking a real leadership role. So it's a real honor to be with this panel and to be able to introduce this group. So Commissioner Johnson is no stranger to the chamber. She has appeared many times, and I really thank her for being here. She's a key member of the Maine Connectivity Authority. I'm going to buzz through everyone, Commissioner, just to give everybody a heads up of the direction we're taking. Tim Schneider, again, no stranger to the chamber. That's difficult to say. Tim was designated by the governor, asked by the governor actually, to be the chair of the Maine Connectivity Authority. We're also joined by Danielle Lauder, another appointee of the governor, representing the healthcare segment of the Maine Connectivity Authority. And I will just add that I was honored to be asked by the governor to participate in the authority as well. So it's really fun to be in this position, to be able to ask all my co-authority members all these difficult questions that I know they're prepared to ask. Just one other thing, please pepper Ben with questions. This is meant to be interactive. I know you're not here to just listen to us speak. We want to get to questions you have. At the same time, I do want to mention that this series started at the beginning. We know this is a hot topic. We were able to announce at the last event that we had was jointly, the panelists were Commissioner Johnson and Senator King. Pretty much the announcement of the Maine Connectivity Authority. And now the authority is beginning stages of being up and running. And that's what we want to highlight on today. So with that, I'm going to start off. We have some key topics that we want to talk about, a high level overview, the support that we have from the legislature, what our timeline looks like, highlights of a very important step in identifying a president to run the authority, next steps in staffing, et cetera. Again, these are topics we want to talk about, but we want to hear from you on the topics you want to hear about. So with that, Commissioner Johnson, if you'd like to kick things off, please do.
Great, thank you, Mike, and good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you all. As Mike said, at the last session, we started talking a little bit about MCA and the kickoff of that. We're going to do just a little bit of recap there to try to level set that work and make sure we're all kind of starting from the same place. And then Tim and Danielle are going to kind of move into what are the next steps of the authority and how do we keep moving forward. So the MCA was actually created by kind of being able to project that there are going to be some pretty significant funding streams coming and really looking at what tools do we need to be able to take advantage of that. How do we need to operate? What needs to be in place? And obviously, Danelle's going to talk, or Tim, sorry, is going to talk a little bit about Connect Maine and the Maine Connectivity Authority and how those work together. But these were this was an opportunity for us to think about ownership of middle mile. How do we reduce ongoing costs for users so that we can improve access to all? Access isn't just about infrastructure. Access can be about affordability. Access can be about equipment. Access can be about awareness and knowledge of how to use the tools and what we can layer on top of the infrastructure. So really, MCA was crafted looking at all of those tools and thinking about what are the possibilities, where had we seen things across the country in little pockets come to play and really matter and change kind of the landscape of either the capital expense that the private sector or communities need to put in, or the operating expenses that either the private sector or communities needed to use. And how can we change that dynamic over the course of time so that rates can be accessible, or that at least there are some accessibility options for people, because affordability is a key part in a state like Maine to make sure that we are inclusive as we think about infrastructure build out. So those are the pieces that created the MCA. And that's what went into that legislation. I would say the governor was on the front lines of this legislation, really thinking about what did we need to do in order to make sure that all Maine people and all Maine locations are connected and equitably connected and have access that is functional and really meets the needs of not just what we know today, but what we see kind of as we go forward. The board is a 7-person board, and then there are a few ex officios like me. They are made up of people that come from the private ISP sector space. Danielle obviously is a healthcare person, and then there is also an education person as well. And then Fred Britton, who is the state CIO, and I both sit as ex officio members on behalf of the administration. So that board has been confirmed. They are underway. And, some of the early stages were very basics. How do we set up bylaws? What does this look like? How do we operate? Now we're moving into the more strategic building blocks going forward. And as Mike said, certainly the legislature was incredibly supportive. We had bipartisan support to continue to move forward. Some good questions about how are we efficient with these funds? How do we make sure that we are leveraging these funds and making the most of the opportunity we have? And those are questions I think we welcome and we should welcome as the Connectivity Authority, because that's right what our role will be, to connect Maine people and to use these funds incredibly efficiently to make sure that we are solving both the infrastructure and the affordability challenges as we move forward. So with that, I will stop here. Tim, I'm going to pass it to you next.
All right, I think I'm unmuted. Great, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Johnson, and thank you to the Chamber and Mike for organizing this panel. Really excited to have the opportunity to speak to this audience about the work we're doing on the MCA, getting things up and running, and the work we're going to do for broadband availability in the state of Maine. So first, when we talk about the MCA, I always, maybe it's like my legal training, but I always like to start with the statutory goals, because that's really going to guide the work that we do. And for those folks who've been following broadband in Maine, these goals will be familiar. They're not new. So the statutory goals of the MCA are that high-speed connectivity be universally available in the state, including to all residents, businesses, and community anchor institutions, that there be secure, affordable, reliable, competitive, and sustainable forward-looking advanced communications technology infrastructure that can meet current and future needs, that all residents, businesses, and institutions in the states are able to take full advantage of the economic, health, educational, and other opportunities available through connectivity services, and that existing public, private, and infrastructure be used effectively and efficiently in the public interest to provide advanced communications technology infrastructure in all areas of the state. And I know that our recitation of statute isn't like super thrilling content here. You all could read that statute, but I think it's really helpful, because that those goals will guide the work of the authority, and I think some careful thought has been put into them. That concept of universal access for broadband is a hard-won concept. The idea that I think we understand now more than at any point previously in the state's history that broadband service is a public utility. It needs to be available for everybody. It's an essential service, much like electricity, like clean water. And so to have that in statute, have that be a statutory goal is really important. The idea that the concept of affordability and sustainability for the infrastructure we build, that we need something that will be there and be forward-looking. I think that's that idea of we're building something that will solve today's problems and the problems we expect to the future. This will be long-lived infrastructure. That third concept that everyone be able to take full advantage is another one that you won't find in other states. And that concept of digital equity has moved to the forefront, but wasn't there 5 years ago. And this was in the language of the statute a long time ago. The idea that it's not simply enough that everyone have access, but that it also be affordable, and that residents of Maine be able to take full advantage of that infrastructure. And that's not simply a matter of just making sure that the fiber goes to or the wireless signal goes to the individual home or business, but we know now that, and we probably knew then, that other things are required. And I guess the last piece is that we're going to use existing public and private infrastructure, that this is going to be a partnership with private providers. It's going to leverage the resources of the state writ largely. Like, there's a lot in those statutory goals. And I didn't want to miss that in that sort of rote recitation of some language in section 9403 that guides our work. I think that, these goals have been in statute for a long time. The difference is now that we have availability of funding that's commensurate with the problem that we know we have. We want to solve those goals. We want to achieve those goals. And they've been like, oh, that would be a nice thing to have. And now through state bond funding, through the designation of American Rescue Plan funding, through the recently passed federal infrastructure bill, we have really for the first time in Maine funding that is commensurate to those goals. And one of the great things sort of looking around the country now is Maine has been preparing for this moment for at least the last 5 years, if not longer, right? We've done a lot of work to look ahead, to be ready for funding to be available, to be able to leverage community infrastructure, community thought and planning that's been happening at a very grassroots level across the state for the last, at least last 5 years. So that when this moment comes, we know what we do. We're well beyond yay broadbanding to let's build some stuff, let's get people connected, let's change people's lives. And that's really exciting. In terms of the timeline, as Heather mentioned, we've been spending a lot of time getting up and running, but now as the federal funds have become available, we really have sort of the first concrete guidelines that will guide our work. And I think Heather will talk a little bit about those funds, but in terms of what's happening right now, we have a board. We are in the process of hiring our first staff member who will begin work for the authority next week. And we have some strategic work that it was underway. We have another meeting on Friday to really frame out the strategic work, because the big deadlines that are looming for us are the American Rescue Plan funds to Treasury. We need to be able to provide a plan for how we're going to spend those funds and be able to draw down those funds, submit our application later this year, and hopefully in Q1 of next year, be able to tell the Treasury what we want to do with the funds that they have made available to the state of Maine, and then start putting it to work in the state. One of the questions that has come up for me since I stepped into this role is, don't you already have a broadband authority? And as Heather mentioned, the Connectivity Authority was created with the recognition that there were some limitations in the governing statute for Connect Maine, that if we wanted to achieve those statutory goals, there were some things we might want to invest a state agency, some powers we might want to invest a state agency in a state agency to achieve those goals. And the ability to own, to make equity investments, the ability to issue revenue bonds. There's a bunch of things that are bound up in the governing statute that are pretty exciting. But we have an effective state agency right now that's doing work right now, distributing grant funds, doing mapping work, doing a lot of that groundwork that we've talked about. And so, my expectation is that the Connectivity Authority and Connect Me will be working out an MOU that will sort of parse out whose responsibilities will be ongoing, who will take responsibility for mapping, because the last thing we want to do is do anything that provides uncertainty around the ongoing work of Connect Me, and particularly supporting community broadband planning and working through the bond funding and any potential federal grants they have available. So really, the goal for the two entities right now is to work seamlessly together to make sure that there's no gap in the ongoing broadband work for the state of Maine, and make sure we're well positioned for the funding that's to come. So that's the authority itself has a statutory deadline to report to the legislature in early January, but there'll be ongoing work over the intervening 2 months to sort of tick and tie the specific responsibilities to the entity as the MCA gets up and running. I think this is where I would hand off to Commissioner Johnson again, if she would like to talk a little bit about the specific funding. And this conversation has changed in the last week, so we have good news to report.
Thanks, Tim. And I would say that it's not firm still. There are still some elements that are subject to change as we move forward. So Tim talked about the existing funding, and that's been a very small funding stream, less than $1 million for the last, at least last 7 years. Last year was the first year that Maine allocated bond funding for broadband, and that was $15 million. Connect Maine has put out half of that already and is working on the remaining funds there. So again, last year, great support in the legislature for a bond. The Maine people really came out very clearly in support of that, moving that bond forward. So that was great help. There are a number of funding streams as part of the Federal Rescue Act. One of them is the governor requested and the legislature supported $21 million of what's called unallocated funding. And the reason to break these out into the three groups instead of just giving the total number is each of them come with different requirements, and the ability to kind of leverage those funds appropriately and make the most of that is really important. And so we keep looking at these as very different funding streams because of the rules that govern that funding mechanism and what the opportunities are there and where we can leverage it. So
Commissioner, could I just jump in for a second?
Please.
Can you try to make sure that we help the audience understand we've got state funding, and then we have some federal money coming, but it goes to the state. And can you be as specific as you can be about how that interaction plays out and how MCA may be or is in a position to be able to help coordinate that?
Like, I can try, Mike. And
I actually have a slide that I'm happy to share.
Great.
That'd be great, Tim. Thanks. Do you want to take this, Tim, with your slide? Go for it. I can jump in.
I see what you did there.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Darn it.
Okay. Yeah. So for those of you who attended our previous Maine Connectivity Authority calls or meetings, we walked through this in one of our early meetings. And Commissioner Johnson, if you see something that is wrong here and you want to provide an update, feel free to wave your hands wildly and jump in and stop me from talking. So the first tranche of fundings that Commissioner Johnson spoke about was the unallocated American Rescue Plan funding. It's 21 million, 10 million, which in this fiscal year came through in October, and an additional 11 million next year. And that is sort of the American Rescue Plan, which was passed, Commissioner Johnson, I think earlier this year, correct? In early 2021.
Yeah, funds just became available October 18th for
Yep.
that. But yes, the legislation was passed earlier in the year.
And then, so that's the first roll of funds. That's state funding that is available to the Connectivity Authority now once we are ready to spend it and comply with the federal obligations that go with it. Second is the American Rescue Plan Capital Projects Fund. This is administered by the Treasury Department. I mentioned this in my previous comments, but the Treasury just issued their rules for governing this about a month ago now. And the initial applications are due from each state by the end of December of this year. And so each state is allocated a specific amount of funds from the overall pool of funds. Maine's allocation is $128 million. So this is off by a little bit. And we need to submit a plan to draw down those funds. So we'll get, when we submit our plan, we get an initial administrative allocation. And then the way the funding is structured, we tell Treasury, okay, here's what we want to spend these on. They're like, yep, that complies with our statutory requirements. And then funds are issued to the Connectivity Authority to fund those programs. I think the big news now, and I haven't sort of ticked and tied from when the slide was created to what was actually just passed yet, because it's still fresh in the news, is that there's additional federal funding coming through the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which was passed over the weekend. And so each end of that program, each state is allocated a minimum of $100 million for broadband deployment. So Maine gets $100 million to start with, and then based on some evaluation of some mapping performed by the SEC, determining who is unserved within that state, each state may be allocated additional funds after that. We just don't really know how that's going to shake out. So for purposes of our discussion, $100 million plus maybe some on the come. And then there's a bunch of other things bound up in that program that are really exciting. So there's a digital equity capacity grant program that helps states fund standing up digital equity programs. There's additional funding for what we know as the emergency broadband benefit funding to people who want to buy broadband services, can't afford it. Currently $50 a month, so like a really material amount for the cost of broadband for folks. There's some competitive grants for middle mile infrastructure, and I think there's some additional digital equity grants. Again, this is I don't think this has changed much, but this is generally what's in the program. What did I get wrong there, Commissioner Johnson? Did I mostly hit it?
No, yeah, you mostly hit it. I just wanted to add that we're just very fortunate as a state to have a federal delegation that led by Senator King that really focuses on broadband funding and recognizes the importance of it and has kind of the ability and capability to advocate for this kind of programming in DC. And I think anytime these large federal fund discussions come up, I always want to make sure we bring that up because we have great leadership in our federal delegation on this topic particularly.
Yeah, I would echo that. Sort of as we watched this being developed, both Senator King and Senator Collins' office were right in there helping to craft this, really understanding how important broadband was to Maine's economic future, and really value the contribution of the delegations on that. So,
yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we'll certainly do with this funding piece, I think, is make sure that we are tracking it in a very visible and accountable way so that people can see, where those funds are and how they'll be being used.
Well, I have a quick question about the funding. So USDA has recently put on seminars. They have been provided some money. Will MCA be involved in any of that coordination, or do you anticipate the potential recipients to go their own way? Can MCA provide guidance if a town or county wanted to pursue that?
I think this is the role we've seen from Connect Maine in the past here has been really helpful in being in touch with communities that are trying to solve broadband problems in the community and helping them to understand the available funding streams that might match to their need. And we've certainly seen that with USDA in the past. That capacity and that role will definitely continue to exist, whether it's within Connect Maine, where it is right now, I think, or the Connectivity Authority going forward. It's like a thing to figure out. I don't think we have a firm answer on that, but Danielle has an answer on it, apparently.
I'm using my Zoom etiquette. So just to throw in there as well, we've had great luck with Maine entities, healthcare organizations, education, economic development, leveraging even pre-COVID some of the USDA dollars, some of the FCC, Federal Communications Commissions, and USAC funds. Some of them are specific eligibility requirements. You have to be a specific type of organization, or you're providing, for example, telebehavioral health. There might be specific use cases. So I think it'll be up to us to coordinate closely with folks. Again, going back to Commissioner Johnson's comments around the importance of effectively and efficiently utilizing, let's get the best bang for our buck, the many bucks that are being dedicated to broadband. And so working closely with the entities that are eligible for applying for those funds when we're assessing, current capacity needs and prioritizing where the different buckets of money go, so that we can be really smart about using these funds to really capture and address ongoing issues, whether it be for telehealth and healthcare, or education, or economic development, or all of the above.
Danielle, while you're at it, I think it'd be good to get under the hood a bit more on MCA. What groups are represented by MCA? And Tim, when he read off the statute, the focus of the statute, the goals of the state, and how MCA was designed to accommodate that, or to make sure that we have everybody engaged that needs to be engaged, all the stakeholders.
Sure. So I'll certainly take a stab at that, and clearly coming from a lens of healthcare and telehealth more specifically, but just an unprecedented opportunity for us to leverage across all different sectors. And how can we collaborate with our collective brain power to make sure we're best leveraging that. But per our charge to ensure that adequate, reliable, and affordable connectivity across Maine, the MCA board includes broad representation from education, healthcare, and economic development perspectives. And through those members, a strong connection with incredible networks of Maine people who are similarly committed to ensuring universal broadband for all Maine people. These are folks that we talk with in our day-to-day life, work life, personal lives, et cetera. So really leveraging those connections to ensure that we're understanding, current needs, whether they be urgent and ongoing needs, As we've seen prior to, and especially during COVID-19, adequate connectivity is a social determinant of health. And while the COVID pandemic has unfortunately exacerbated the digital divide for many, as Jay mentioned in his opening comments, it's has also resulted in strong bipartisan policy and funding support for rapid expansion to ensure equitable access moving forward. And, as Commissioner Johnson said, we've just been so fortunate, even before, telehealth and broadband expansion were cool, if you will. Our congressional delegation has done an amazing job building support and recognizing the importance of this as a social determinant of health and equitable access to education and economic development, and bringing and keeping great people here in the state of Maine from a business perspective. Broadband infrastructure is a necessity in a modern economy and a vital tool in increasing access to education, to quality healthcare, and subsequently improving outcomes associated with those different sectors. For an aging rural population like Maine's, telehealth can decrease burdens associated with transportation while simultaneously ensuring access to the best patient care available. However, due to lack of broadband access, rural patients and healthcare providers are often unable to leverage technology to its fullest potential. And we've seen the importance of that, especially during the pandemic, and need to be ready for that type of thing. And certainly moving forward, to be a leader. And I think there's tons of potential based on, our landscape and the support that we have both at a state level and a federal level for Maine to be a leader in that respect. And to utilize the MCA as a mechanism to do that. And we have seen a great deal of flexibility in telehealth policy at both the federal and state level during the public health emergency. For example, allowance of patients to receive care within their homes. But that's not a possibility if you don't have adequate broadband at your home or some type of adequate connectivity, right? And there have also been, folks, federal and state policy changed quickly to accommodate audio only accessibility for telehealth, but we're unsure that would require federal policy change to sustain that permanently. And we're unsure of how that will look, and audio only is not the best modality for all use cases for telehealth. And so that adequate connection for both audio and video for really good services is just really important. And we've got that expertise and that reflected in the MCA board and through the networks of people that we work with and who are dedicated to seeing this happen. It's a large scope and a large job to do. But I think as others colleagues have mentioned, this is an opportune time for us to do this. It's really incredible.
Thank you. I think you can sense the how everyone on the MCA feels and of our mission and the mission for the state. Tim, as chair of MCA, I can put this question to you. Can you talk a little bit about the staffing? I know there was a press release recently about the initial addition, but anything that you'd like to share with the group on the future plans of MCA, how that will all integrate?
Yeah, sure. So I think as the governor announced, and time is illusion during a pandemic, but since a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, she intends to nominate Andrew Butcher as the president of the MCA, and that position requires approval by the Maine legislature. And so there will be a confirmation process for that. Andrew has graciously offered to step in to serve and do the work of the authority pending confirmation. And he'll start doing that work next week. So we'll have our first paid staffer. For those of you who've been watching, I think it's probably been evident that this is an all volunteer operation, but we'll have our first professional staff beginning next week. And once that's up and running, Andrew's goal in the first 30, 60, 90 days will be to both come up with a budget of that organization and to flesh out that staffing plan. But we're not, I think Commissioner Johnson mentioned efficiency as a real goal here. We're not hiring people just to hire people. So the goal will be that staffing will match the strategic goals of the organization, which we are spending some time on this week and hope to be able to share with the public more broadly shortly.
Mike, can I just jump in for a quick second on this one?
Sure.
Because I think it's important, and it was a while ago now, but just an important thing to say, which is we had a ton of great candidates. We had people from across the country applying for this job, people with, really interesting sets of skills, people from big name companies that you would know, people from federal agencies that you would recognize. And so we had a real opportunity, and I think it certainly helps to validate the work and our approach to the work here, that those people wanted to come in and be part of this. So we were really fortunate, I think, to have a great candidate pool, and Andrew just shown brightly as part of that candidate pool for lots of really great reasons. So we're very, I don't think he's on, but we're very appreciative that he's coming on and is willing to step into this space.
Mike, I'd like to jump in real quick because we have a couple questions in the chat, and I just would like to remind folks who are in the audience, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat and we will be sure to get to them. So the first question, Jay asked, what sort of resources do we have for local leaders, county commissioners, select boards, town managers who might not know where to start in terms of how to spend and use these federal dollars for broadband expansions in their communities?
Why don't I start, and then we'll kind of all jump in. This is always one of the weird parts of Zoom. So I think it's a great question, because this ability to stack capital resources is going to be critical to how we are all efficient and leverage these opportunities. What we've seen so far are communities that have really done a great job starting a planning process. Denmark as an example, right? They've got a good group of people. They're advertising and getting interesting information that they need. They're prepping the community for what comes next. So, right, the infrastructure build out is only one part of it. I see Paul Toll kind of in Aroostook County. The Aroostook Partnership is working on, a similar project. So some of that work is already going on. But what I would say is this new wave of funds that is coming to the local communities as well as to the counties is going to be a critical part of how we all get to kind of affordable access. And so there are a handful of ways. I think we've got more to do there as well on how do we create that mesh that allows everybody to kind of plug into that. I know Peggy and the Connect Maine team are working on that. I think as soon as Andrew starts at the end of this week, he'll jump into that as well. There are a number of ways to do that. I don't know that we're going to dictate the way to do that, but I think the teams will work their way there. But I do think it's a really important flag. Tim or Danielle, anything to add to that?
Yeah, so two things. One, Connect Maine's been, funding community broadband planning grants to help communities figure it out. And that's often the first step. Well, maybe the 1.5 step for communities that identify local champions, but broadband is the thing we want to focus on. There's some initial steps in there around knowing what resources exist in your community, knowing who the potential partners are, knowing your community anchor institutions. There's a bunch of sort of the baby steps there that Connect Me has helped folks fund, and they will have ongoing community broadband planning grants through the existing funds, not even through those different sources of funding that were in my slide. I guess the other thing is that there is a really, I mentioned this earlier, there's a really robust community of folks who have been figuring out, community of communities, I guess is what I would say, that, and David, I think that you mentioned the work of the Maine Broadband Coalition. I think you said you're a proud member of the Maine Broadband Coalition earlier, and they have great resources, and they're able to connect people who are similarly situated, not just in that process, we're at the same stage, but maybe right next to each other. In the work that I do in my day job, these things all are amenable to scale. It all works better at scale. So if you find two communities that are right next door to each other, they often share the same problem, and they are, once you can get over the coordination issues, which in Maine is a huge caveat, but there's often a more desirable solution there through interregional coordination from communities that are next to each other. And one of the great roles that the Broadband Coalition has played is being a sort of an ancillary resource to Connect Maine in connecting folks who may have resources that or similar problems. And I would encourage folks to get involved there and talk to their peers in that context as well.
Danielle, I don't want to pick on you, but I do want to ask you, does MCA have a good representation for communities as part of the authority? Do you feel the communities have an ear with MCA?
Absolutely. And in fact, as part of the interview process, when we were interviewing the great group of president candidates, that was identified as one of the major roles of MCA, and in fact, under the guise of the president's role, and how would they ensure that we have adequate and constant feedback from communities. That is going to be a big charge for MCA and for the staff of the MCA moving forward, because nothing about us without us, right? I come from a public health organization, and it's just ingrained in me, and it's how I think and I work. And so I was just really pleased as an MCA board member to see that as a core component of what we are looking to do. And as both Commissioner Johnson and Tim have mentioned, there's a lot of fantastic work that's been going on with needs assessments, planning, et cetera. So I would just say, as a related piece with Ken Murchison had asked about the idea, do we have any idea of disposition of planning dollars versus shovel-ready dollars? We are a diverse group, right? But I don't think there's any doubt among all of us on the MCA. The vast majority of this money needs to go out into the communities as shovel-ready dollars. That's not a question. And so we will leverage the amazing mapping work, for example, of Peggy and her team at Connect Maine as data to utilize, and the many by county, by communities that have teamed up together to do needs assessments, et cetera. So a lot of that information is there, and we need to prioritize where those shovel-ready dollars go. So just wanted to kind of address that question as well in the same moment.
Mike, to answer your specific question, Carlos Barriduevo is the specific representative on behalf of Maine communities on the board, and that's a lot of weight for one person to carry to represent all communities in Maine. But his sort of concrete experience trying to solve the tactical problems of bringing broadband to Georgetown has been valuable, and I think will be valuable on an ongoing basis. I know that you've worked with communities throughout New England in your day job on that, and I expect that once as the authority gets rolling, we will be, as Danielle described, working out and partnering and looking for feedback from communities, because that's really how we got here in Maine, like that sort of town by town, region by region conversations about how we solve this problem. I love that, Danielle. Nothing for us without us. Nothing about us without us.
Nothing about us without us. Yep.
Yeah. No.
And you have some additional questions. Let me just preface what I'm seeing for questions are exactly what I would expect. Where we all are and why we're here and why MCA is here is, how do we coordinate this? There's the pent-up need. We used to refer to this as pent-up demand in the old days. This is pent-up need, and it's just growing every day. Coordinating with the towns, coordinating with groups of towns, political subdivisions, and at least when we look at NTIA, they were very specific about public-private partnerships and how they viewed that as being a very important piece. I'd really like to get to each of these questions because we have the time and we have the experts, but the overarching is really, it's a setup. Why was MCA created, and what our charge is right here in these questions. So Ben, if you would, please.
Yeah, sure, Mike. And I know Commissioner Johnson alluded to Paul's question in the chat, but just to give an opportunity to expand on it more, Paul asked, some of our municipalities are already 80 to 90% served, but the remaining rural underserved is the issue where municipal broadband formation typically won't make sense. Will the MCA have the ability to partially fund private ISPs to encourage resolving the remaining low density roads, much like RDOF does?
Yeah, thanks. I can take the lead on that question, Paul, and I think it's an excellent question. So first, we should use our the terms that'll be guiding our work, right? What's unserved and what's underserved. So taking the most recent tranche of funding from the bipartisan infrastructure bill, unserved is places that lack 25.3, and underserved are places that lack 100 by 20 for the uninitiated 100 megabit per second download and upload. That's the 100 by 20. And so that'll really define the places that we are able to solve problems within the state of Maine. And one of the benefits of the work that has been done to date is we have really good mapping resources, some of the best in the country, frankly, in our ability to define where those places are. And when you look at those resources and you look at the story they tell, they say two things. They say, one, we have large swaths of the state that all fit within the underserved. These are like 100 by 20 standard. Those are places that really don't have access to cable infrastructure in practice right now, which is the technology available throughout most of the state that would meet the 100 by 20 standard. So there's like big chunks of the state where that's true. And in those places, to your question, those are really amenable to the kind of public-private partnerships we've seen work to great success in the state of Maine. Like, how do we solve this problem at scale? There are also lots of nooks and crannies, like places that, to your point, really look more like the private provider went to the places where the economics made sense, and then they didn't go the rest of the way because the economics didn't make sense. This is not because they're evil, not because just because like they're running businesses and there's no imperative to serve those places, and they're like, it doesn't really make economic sense. And the reason for the government subsidy and the reason for this intervention is that we can help make it make sense for the first time. And so I would expect that the Connectivity Authority, if it's, in order to spend these funds, is going to have to solve both those problems. It's going to have to take big bites in the places where it makes sense, and is going to have to come up with a solution in partnership with private providers for those places where you need to go to the end of the road, you need to go around the rest of the lake, or whatever it is, like that kind of program. And that kind of program we really haven't had to date in Maine because we really haven't had the funds to administer it. But I think, to be able to invest the funding that we have in the places that the federal funding allows us to serve, we'll need a program like that. It doesn't exist. As far as I know, there's not a good national model for it. There are some good examples in other utility contexts, like we see electricity or natural gas utilities have line extension programs where like that might serve as like an adjacent model for this, for how do you get folks invested to like go the rest of the way in places where service doesn't already exist. But I expect that the Connectivity Authority will have to come up with a solution on that to effectively spend the federal dollars. Hopefully that was responsive to the question.
I'm just going to jump in because unofficial panelist. One of the things that we also need to coordinate and help the towns and providers is there's fortunately, a changing definition of underserved. And making sure that some federal money can't be used to overbuild certain speeds. It's a very complicated but very exciting opportunity, and MCA is going to be able to help with that. We can't expect every community to understand what they're trying to say. The guidance, thank goodness, for example, from Treasury, very flexible. But at the same time, if you're trying to put together a grant or trying to put together a program, not very telling, not very helpful. So all of these things are on the agenda. It's a moving target. So thanks. Any other panelists have anything to add to that particular topic? Next question, Ben, if you have one.
Yep, absolutely. This will get us caught up on questions from the attendees. Nate asked, what role and capacity will MCA have communicating with municipalities and counties as build-out talks continue?
When I start, Tim, or Danielle, when you jump in, I think the communication of this work is going to be critical, right? The ability to be transparent and clear with what the needs are and what the opportunities are and how those align, and making sure that kind of this process is something people recognize and understand, and it's usable and functional for people. So I think that communication piece is one of the most critical pieces that MCA will kind of do at the start to make sure that kind of people know how and where to plug into this. So I think that's a critical piece. I think Connect Maine has done a really good job there. I think the Broadband Coalition does a really great job there as well. And I think as we start to work together to get to affordable access for everyone, that will be a critical path piece. I don't know that we have all the answers yet, or actually, I know we don't have all the answers yet, but I do think we've seen some things work really well. And I think it is very high on the priority list to move forward. Tim or Danielle or Mike, anything to add to that?
I think just, leveraging networks and relationships and working with different groups like municipalities in the way that's most user-friendly to communicate information. We will have a strong web presence with a web page. Forgive the current web page because it's there to make sure that everybody gets the information that they need, but it was the quick and dirty version, but we will have much stronger and more interactive web page coming, social media, et cetera, as far as, the public side of things, getting communications out. But I couldn't agree with Commissioner Johnson. More communication will be a key facet of the work moving forward.
Here's a question kind of adding on to that. Are there any plans right now for MCA? I know there's pent-up demand. We have some stakeholders that want to share their experience, share what they're seeing out there. What does MCA plan to do, or how are we going to deal with that?
Yeah, sure. So I think just talking more broadly about the work of the Connectivity Authority to date, right? Like we have a diverse board with a lot of different background, and we have some hard work to do to set up, to get situated for the work that's ahead of us. And so much of the early work of the Connectivity Authority has been in the public meetings, educating the board, because we're bound appropriately by Maine's public meeting laws. Like we're doing our education right out in the open. Here's what we have to do. Here's how we do it. Sort of with the existing board members are also working behind the scenes to like tick and tie the, getting a relationship with the state budget office, getting the ability to hire, like all of the work you need to do to establish a new state agency is also happening. Mostly administrative work. There is a lot of work that was already been done, notably a facilitated advisory session. Mike, I think you were part of this. Like that many of these people, I'm looking at the list of people on the call earlier this summer to help guide the work of the advisory authority in a structured way. One of my concerns always in the sort of seeking feedback is that it elevates the voices that are most prepared to speak. I guess if that, like the sort of the usual suspects, people who have full-time people on their payroll to say, here's what we think should happen. And I think the work of the MCA is to be like, well, we're going to have a much broader conversation than that, and rely on the work that's already been done, both sort of formally in sessions like this, the broadband work that Connect Me has done in developing their own broadband planning, and my current thinking on this, just like naming it out loud, is that we're going to come up and have like an outline of a plan. Like, here's how we plan to approach these problems, and solicit broad public feedback on that plan, so that people, instead of being like, here's what we think should happen, and we sort of generally know what we can do within our federal funding, but like, here's what the Connectivity Authority, like, here's our initial approach to how we plan to solve this problem and how to achieve those statutory goals. Give us structured feedback, not sort of pie in the sky about what you see will happen, but how you think this will solve your problem and respond to your specific, because we need to act, and the time for sort of like open air reflection about experience and stuff has passed. We're like in the doing phase, and let's like get specific feedback on specific plans so we can like take that feedback into account and roll out. And I think you'll see that over the next 2 months, just timeline wise.
Danielle, Commissioner, any other thoughts on that particular subject? Well, let me throw out an easy question while we gather more questions, Ben. Tim, I know the answer, but I'll ask you anyway. When you gave your opening remarks, you talked about a forward-looking goal. Can our listeners translate that into future-proof? I mean, that's kind of the buzzword everybody's using, future-proof. Can I add that into your opening remarks of forward-looking, future-proofing the state?
Well, I'm just taking the forward-looking language straight from the statute. People like, maybe we can just pause a minute. Like, what do we talk about when we talk about future proofing?
Right.
So when I first started part of the broadband policy conversation in Maine State back in 2013, we were talking about what level of investment was adequate to support people's broadband needs in the state of Maine. And the fight at the time was whether ConnectMe's existing definition of broadband, which was 3 megabits down and 1 megabits up, was sufficient. And that's the conversation we were having. Like, yeah, this seems like it'll be fine. I was like, well, I'm not even sure this is fine now, but it's definitely not going to be fine 5 years from now. Everything we see suggests otherwise. But that was the policy conversation. We're in a very different place right now. Like whether 100 by 20 is adequate, I think is an open question right now. We are in a place where the standards we thought were adequate 2 years ago, we know not to be inadequate. Anyone who's tried to do their job while their kids are remote school, multiple children are remote schooling on their 25/3 connection will be like, that's not adequate, or even their 50/20 connection, right? That's like, it strains the existing infrastructure, particularly during periods of high demand within the local network, right? Here's what I think we're talking about when it's future proof. It's definitely it's a very high speed, where it's like, the definition is 100 by 20. The Treasury funding says you're going to build 100 by 100, and we have a preference for fiber. And I think that when people talk about fiber, they say future proof. I think there are other technologies that can meet that standard, but and when we say future proof, we're also really thinking about sustainability. Like, we're going to make investments in long-lived infrastructure because we're not going to get another chance like this. We're not going to get a sort of significant chunk of federal funding that allows us to make these kind of long-term meaningful investments. And so if we do it in a way that solves the problem now, but everybody goes bankrupt 5 years from now, or solves the problem now and we don't have a way to ensure that the infrastructure is affordable over the long term, we haven't really done anything. And so we want to make long-term investments that we can rely on for years to come. And I think that's sort of when we talk about future proof, it's not about technologies, it's about sustainability and the framework going forward.
Ben, did you have some other questions?
We do, Mike. Another question in the chat. We've heard some different estimates for how much it might cost to connect 95% plus of Mainers to affordable broadband. Do any of you have thoughts on what this number might be, or what we should expect to see as we try to reach these nooks and crannies of our state?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tim.
No.
You just weren't started, so I unmuted.
I talked too much.
I guess the answer I would give is I don't feel like we have a really good answer for a variety of reasons. One is the cost of materials is moving around quite a bit right now. So that's one piece. One piece is, to Tim's point, what is the target, right? Is it 100 over 20? What is it? And how do we do that? And what new technologies that are being tested will help with that? So I think there are lots of variables there. I think the Connect Maine Authority has done a great job working with Tilson and with Vetro to really narrow in on how many locations fit into these buckets now, which is an advantage we've never had. So I think we're rapidly moving down that path, but I don't feel like we're there with a number. But Tim or Danielle, if you all feel differently.
Yeah, I guess I would just add that, like, you did complicate all these questions. Sort of historically, when we've thought about this number, we've been like, tell me the number that are unserved, come up with a working definition of the cost to like get to the average one of those, and then we'll like come up with a number it takes to provide broadband service everywhere in Maine. What we know in like practice is that private providers are willing to come in and play, like if you provide meaningful subsidy. So you don't actually need to provide like the total cost to get to that place. You can provide some incremental subsidy, then the private markets will respond. Or you might be solving it through a public-private partnership where there will be other sources of funding other than state grant money or patient capital that is looking for a different level of return than a private provider. And so we're at the point now where like the specific number, that number of sort of the legacy number of being like, what are the number of homes and what is the cost per location isn't really useful. We're in the place now of being like, what is the number it will take to solve this problem, which might be, depending on the location, depending on the funding mechanism, depending on the partnerships involved, could be very different on a per location basis, which makes it hard to come up with the like, oh man, this will cost 600 million to solve and we only have 250, shoot, we won't be done. Like, that's the work of the authority, is like how to leverage the funds we have to solve the problem as best we can. And I don't think it's amenable to that sort of matching that everyone wants, that one-to-one like number and funds. Sorry to make everything complicated, but like the work itself is just complicated.
Well, I think the most difficult part of that is the definition of affordable. I've never been able to get under the hood on that. I don't know. I think it's personal to every single person you ask that question to. So for a state to take that on.
Well, Mike, I actually think I mean, we can do some, we can do some work here, right? Like we know, for example, that this is a question we're going to have to answer as part of the response to the Treasury. They're going to ask us to say, how are you ensuring that the service you provide is affordable? And part of that answer is going to be the emergency broadband benefit, that $50 a month subsidy, which is not a panacea in and of itself, because it's a pain in the butt to access, right? It's like very hard for individuals who want to take advantage of that subsidy to navigate the administrative and bureaucratic path to get there. So that's like I think that's like on the list of things the Connectivity Authority should be working on solving, is how to make that accessible to as many Mainers as possible. And there's a follow-on subsidy. There's like that feels like it's definitely part of the solution. I guess I think that when we talk about affordability, we're looking at a proxy for what a competitive market would provide. Like, what does it cost to provide broadband in like the places where we have multiple broadband providers and they are like competing to make it affordable? And that might be like, can we hit that number plus a subsidy, and is that number affordable? The number isn't zero, right? Like all of the electric utilities in Maine, for example, have low income programs, and no one gets their electricity for free. Like, this is a service, people will need to pay something for it. Coming up with what that standard to be, like, we're not going to get it exactly right for everyone, but we'll probably end up on a number that is like, here's the cost of service, here's the available subsidy, and is this number something that we think that most people can afford, knowing that it is an essential service?
Commissioner Danielle, did you have any other thoughts?
Oh, total agreement. On the other side of that, if folks don't have, devices to access, and I know there are many who are working on that end of things as well. Health systems, the National Digital Equity Center, Susan Corbett and her crew. So that's the other side of that. So we need to ensure that affordability for the connectivity, but then also making sure that folks have devices in their hands to access as well.
I think EBB, just to add on, Tim, EBB is a good example of how that need can be addressed. Whether the feds keep doing it, the state does it. It's a pain right now, but I think it's recognition again at the federal level of how critical this important thing is. Just one quick question. I wanted to follow up with Commissioner Ben before you get to the next one. And Commissioner, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but your discussion of technology, is it safe to say that MCA is technology neutral as long as that technology is meeting the needs of the grant, that particular grant, or the goal of the state? I did put words in your mouth, didn't I?
You did put words in my mouth. I think right there are so MCA has got to come up with their decisions. I guess my personal view on that is if it does the work and is sustainable and accessible and affordable, then yes, right? I mean, it doesn't matter to me personally, right? If people can get broadband or high speed that works for them, meets the standards, right? Is this accessible and affordable without latency issues and data cap issues and throughput issues, then, I think that's what we're looking to do. Obviously, MCA has got a standard that they all need to set. I think there's work there to be done around what are the goals, and certainly all of these federal funds come with certain stipulations, and so we'll have to line philosophical beliefs to MCA statute to federal funding needs and local concerns, because locals will have a certain amount, local communities will have different views on what they believe they need, how they're going to utilize it, those types of things. All of those things need to come into play.
Thank you. Ben, another question?
Yep, absolutely. We got a couple more in the chat, Mike. We did have a question. We've mentioned mapping resources. How does one access these resources? Danielle, I noticed you responded to that comment in the chat, but I just wasn't sure if there's anything else you wanted to add to that, maybe for some of the folks who might not be monitoring what's going on in the chat.
Sure. So there are a number of readily accessible mapping tools available, and I would certainly point to Connect Maine as one of the leaders. As Tim mentioned earlier, Maine's a leader in this area with respect to really digging down. There have been federal maps available for quite some time, but the data is not getting to the granularity and the accuracy that we have here in the state. There certainly are, I think, opportunities to work with to get even more granular with folks at Connect Maine and others. Vetro, Commissioner Johnson mentioned them, have been leaders in this space here in Maine and in other areas. Tim, I know you've worked very closely with that throughout the past couple of years. So I don't know if you have anything to add about additional resources specific to mapping.
I think this is one of those things where Connect Maine has really built a bunch of expertise, and there's no need for the MCA to duplicate it. And I would encourage folks who are interested in what the existing mapping resources say to reach out to Connect Maine, because they're the holders of the keys there, and they will definitely be relying on those resources, but they really have the expertise. I can just talk, but like, you should talk to the people who know.
The next question we had, we have about 10 more minutes for some questions and answers. So if there's anyone in the audience that has a question, please get it in and we'll try and get to as many as possible before we conclude. The next question that is in the chat is there going to be any legislative effort to create a template for utility districts similar to what Vermont is doing with their CUDs?
Yeah, so we are a creation of the legislature and not the legislature, so I can't speak to what the legislature might do. Vermont's model is really interesting, right? They've divided up the state into their utility districts and dictated that all the funding will flow through those districts, really like anchoring in a public ownership model. And they have some really successful examples in that state, like that they are hoping to replicate and build on. In Maine, we have regional broadband utilities, like those exist, and some of them are up and providing a service right now. So I don't know that I don't know that existing statutory work is required to create that framework for that kind of inter-local coordination. I know that I know there's one was formed in Katahdin, I believe, and then there's the Down East Broadband Utility. So there's some really strong examples in Maine that have leveraged the existing statutory authority or existing legislative authority to do that. I'm not sure if there's an additional problem to solve through legislative change. And feel free to speak up in the chat if you know other ones I missed. Those are the ones that are sort of top of mind where folks have done that. Yeah.
I think part of our role is to make sure that we're sharing those models that have been successful, and maybe even more importantly, those that haven't, because we learn from those, right? And so we're to be a source for making sure that we get that information out to folks quickly and effectively.
Speaking of the legislature, Tim, you mentioned in the statute we have to report to the legislature. Is there any established legislative oversight of MCA, or do you anticipate that? What do you think our relationship will be with the legislature going forward?
Yeah, so as a quasi-public entity, we have, as that kind of entity in state government, we have specific reporting requirements that are tied to that, requirements for an annual report. Our committee of jurisdiction, we'd expect to be the Energy, Utilities, and Technology Committee. I expect they're going to be very interested in what the Connectivity Authority does. In the near term, we have some, I don't think people are going to stop caring about broadband, like just because they've created a new entity. They're going to be like, are you doing the job? How's it working?
Right.
Or we think you're not doing the job, like, here we are. Hopefully not the latter. But in the near term, we have specific reporting requirements in the beginning of this year around the plans for the relationship between Connect Maine and the Connectivity Authority, specific reporting requirements tied to being a quasi-public entity. And I gotta expect that part of good stewardship of public funds would be reporting on the work that we are doing spend the federal funds and like what the planning is. And I'm looking forward, hopefully not me, hopefully it's the professional staff of the Connectivity Authority will have a close working relationship with both the governor's office and the committees of jurisdiction on this issue.
Other questions, Ben? I think we've covered most of them. Oops.
There was one in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
I might have missed this, but what is the working definition of affordable?
Yeah, so Jack, I appreciate the question, and I appreciate the attempt to nail me down on a specific number there after I gave you like the broad principles by which I thought we would approach the problem. And I would have a number, right? That doesn't exist yet, and it would be. We're about to go into a strategic session for the Connectivity Authority, where the people who are in this room and a bunch of other people who are members of the board will be like digging in on these specific questions, which the public is invited to observe. I think that we will need to answer that question. And I think that the Treasury Department is going to require it. So I don't have an answer for you right now. I sort of offered the principles by which I think we would approach the problem, but I don't think we have a number right now.
Oh, I did see a note from Connect Maine. It's in the chat. Christine Hultquist is actually the head of the equivalent of the MCA in Vermont. Carol Monroe, many of us know Carol, very active in the broadband world. So they're going to do a presentation. Ben, any other questions that you see? I think I just have one question, and this may be a good way to wrap this up. And I think you folks have answered it in many of your different discussions, but assuming the chamber would invite this group back, can we anticipate regular updates from MCA? What would be the best route for people to get updates going forward? It's like we say, we know the pent-up demand is there. Every announcement you see in the press of more infrastructure money is just going to expand that broadband. What is the advice that you folks might have for people who want to stay current on MCA efforts?
Yeah, I think I can probably take that one if it's okay. Looks like we know. I don't think that Maine has done a great job to date in telling its success stories, which there are many, right? Like there's lots of places where we've figured things out. And in previous roles, I've been like, here are the things we've done right around broadband. We haven't really told that story. And I think it's important both in providing information that other communities can rely on to help figure out how to solve those problems. Like here's how someone else has like fixed their broadband problem. That there are communities where like everybody has fiber to the home and it's affordable and it's done. And they're like on to the net. There are other problems, there are other challenges that Maine communities face, and that's not one of them. And I think you, Mike, earlier asked around staffing. I think one of the things we're going to we know is going to be part of the staffing plan is that public communications role. How do we tell people? Having a website that we haven't cobbled together by volunteers and like having a mature web presence would be a starting point. Social media, that sort of whole panoply of things. That is all on the come because we've earned all volunteer organization for another week. And we'll expect in that first 90-day plan to be coming up with like a robust presence for how we tell about what we're going to do. Because in order for us to be successful, we're going to have to do just that kind of communication to private providers, to communities, to the public at large, because people are going to ask. And so we have a web presence right now, www.maineconnectivity.org. We have an existing mailing list, which if you were on Connect Maine's mailing list 2 months ago, you're on our mailing list unless you've opted off. So we are communicating via that. And I expect you'll see other means to hear about the work of the Connectivity Authority going forward. Because hopefully we will have many successes to tout. And I hope that when we come back, we'll be like, here are the ways in which we have crushed it. And here we've spent these funds wisely to help solve those problems that we identified earlier.
Thank you, Tim. I can't think of a better ending than what Tim just said right there, Ben. I just want to personally thank the panelists. I know them, I know the work they're doing, and I know their heart's in the right place to do the right thing for Maine. It's really a pleasure to be the moderator and to work with them going forward. So thank you all very much for attending, and look for more coming your way. Ben?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And I just want to first, echo the, the thanks to Tim, Danielle, Commissioner Johnson for joining us today. I also want to thank you, Mike, for doing a great job facilitating and moderating this really, fascinating discussion about the opportunity that we have with broadband in Maine. I do want to give a final thanks to our sponsors, our high-speed series sponsor, Mission Broadband, our bandwidth sponsors of AARP Maine and LCI Fiber Optic Network, our community sponsors of First Light, Hammond Lumber Company, Northern Light Health, Preddy Flaherty, and the University of Southern Maine School of Business. And finally, our webinar series sponsors, who are Central Maine Power, Eaton Peabody, MEMIC, and Rudman Winchell. And I want to thank all of the folks who attended and watched this webinar today. We will be posting the recording of it on our website, and we will circulate it with all the folks who registered to attend. And please feel free to circulate that with anyone in your network, so you might find this this conversation informative. And with that, I would close it out and thank everyone again.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you.
Everyone.
Hi, everyone.